In 2012, the science was settled. A research team published what every newspaper called a landmark, the complete genome of a Copper Age man who had spent 5,300 years frozen in an alpine glacier. The first ancient human genome ever fully sequenced. They told us he had pale skin, light eyes, ancestry that traced back to the Eastern European steppe. They named him an Alpine European. They put him in textbooks. They built a sculpture. They wrote 432 papers citing what they found. 432. And the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy, commissioned a life-size physical reconstruction. Artists worked from the genetic data, gave him a weathered, pale face, a full head of hair, light-colored eyes that looked unmistakably like a man from Central Europe. More than 1 million visitors have stood 2 meters from that figure and believe they were looking at the face of someone who walked the Alps before the wheel existed. That reconstruction is still there today, I checked. There are currently no plans to revise it. Here's the problem. Buried inside that celebrated 2012 genome was a number that nobody flagged publicly for over a decade. A 600-year gap. The genome showed steppe ancestry from herder populations who migrated out of Eastern Europe. But every other archaeological and genetic study in the field agreed those herder populations didn't reach Central Europe until roughly 4,900 years ago. Ötzi died around 3,300 BCE. That's a 600-year impossibility sitting right in the middle of the most famous ancient genome ever published. 600 years in the data. And the field moved forward anyway. 432 papers, a reconstructed face, a museum visited by 1 million people a year, a decade of European prehistory built on a foundation that, it turns out, nobody had fully checked. And yet, the data said the exact opposite of what everyone had accepted. Because the steppe ancestry wasn't from a man who died 5,300 years ago, part of it came from someone who is almost certainly still alive. If you've ever actually wondered where you come from, not the family story, but the real biological answer, subscribe. Because what I'm about to show you goes deeper than most people are willing to go. And it starts with whose DNA was really in that sample. Before we go any further, I want to know something. Drop it in the comments. Where in the world do you live? And I mean that specifically because the genetic correction we're about to examine changes the ancestry map for living Europeans right now. By the end of this video, you'll know whether Ötzi's corrected lineage runs in populations near you, or whether it vanished from the earth completely. Tell me where you are. I read every one. When researchers first touched the mummy, they left something behind. That's not a metaphor, that's the finding. In Leipzig, Germany, at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, archaeogeneticist Johannes Krause and his team began resequencing Ötzi's genome around 2021. Standard procedure on paper, just using newer technology to improve resolution on an existing sample. What they found was not an improvement, it was a correction, a total one. Here's how ancient DNA works. When biological material degrades over thousands of years, it leaves a chemical signature, a specific kind of damage at the ends of DNA fragments where cytosine converts to uracil. It's a molecular clock, essentially, a timestamp. If your fragments have that damage pattern, they're ancient. If they don't, they're recent. They're from someone alive. The 2012 genome contained fragments without that damage pattern. Chemically clean, chemically fresh. Embedded inside a 5,300-year-old sample. The sequencing had captured not just Ötzi's biology. It had captured the biology of the modern scientists who handled him, extracted from him, processed him. The steppe ancestry that defined Ötzi in every textbook, every documentary, every museum label, it belonged, in part, to someone who may have been sitting in a lab coat reading the results on a screen. But here's where it gets strange. Because when Krause's team stripped out the contamination and ran the corrected genome, the steppe ancestry didn't diminish. It disappeared. Completely. What remained was something nobody had predicted. More than 92% Anatolian early farmer ancestry. That's higher than any other known individual from Copper Age Europe. Higher than anyone from his era, anywhere on the continent. Johannes Krause published those results in August 2023 in the journal Cell Genomics, alongside colleagues including K. Wang from Fudan University and Stefan Schiffels, also of the Max Planck Institute. What their paper established was not just a corrected genome. It established that the Ötzi the world had studied for a decade, the pale, steppe-connected Alpine European in the Bolzano Museum, was a partial fiction built from the cells of his own researchers. Every paper that cited steppe ancestry, every textbook chapter, every documentary, working from a portrait that included the genetic signature of the people painting it. This isn't a scandal. That's important to say clearly. The technology to detect contamination at this resolution did not exist in 2012. The scientists who published that first genome were working at the absolute frontier of what was possible. But here's what it means for the field. If the most studied ancient human in history required a full decade's correction, how many other early ancient DNA studies were built from similarly contaminated foundations? The question isn't about Otzi anymore. It's about every ancient population model assembled before modern contamination controls became standard. That question is still open. The field is still reckoning with it. And Otzi, the real one, the corrected one, is more than 92% Anatolian farmer. More Neolithic than the Neolithic, which raises a different question entirely. What was he doing there? 300 kilometers north of where Otzi will die, something is happening that will change the genetic composition of an entire continent. It's around 4000 BCE. Herder populations from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the vast grasslands stretching from what is now Ukraine into Central Asia, are moving west. They carry horses, they carry wheel-based transportation, and they carry a Y chromosome haplogroup called R1b that will, within 500 years, account for a majority of male lineages across northern and western Europe. Modern genetic studies suggest these steppe migrations replaced up to 75% of male ancestry in regions of northern Europe within just a few generations. The Alps don't move. Wang, Schiffels, Krause, and their team found in their 2023 Cell Genomics paper that Otzi's population shows essentially no genetic exchange with the hunter-gatherer populations that were already hybridizing with incoming steppe groups just north and west of the mountains. The range functioned as a genomic barrier. Not a wall with gates, a wall without them. His community sat at over 92% Anatolian-derived ancestry, while populations a short geographic distance away were already becoming something genetically different. This discovery was sitting in the data for years. Nobody talked about what it actually meant, until the contamination was removed and the signal came through clean. Because here's what that number means at ground level. Otzi wasn't a survivor clinging to the edge of a dying world. His community was thriving in a mountain refugium, a sealed genetic pocket where the ancestry of the original European Neolithic farmers persisted in concentrations found nowhere else on the continent. He wasn't the last of something. He was the purest remaining expression of something that had already been largely replaced everywhere else. A 2025 study published in Nature Communications, led by researchers at Rewrote in Bolzano and analyzing 22 alpine individuals across 2,000 years, confirmed the picture. Across the Copper Age and into the Bronze Age, the alpine population maintained roughly 80 to 90% Anatolian farmer ancestry. For more than 2 millennia, the mountains held. Then, around 2400 BCE, a child's bones tell a different story. A small girl, cataloged in the study as LAS01, shows the first detectable trace of steppe ancestry in the alpine genetic record. She was probably the first generation, not a wave. One child. For over 2,000 years, a genetically distinct population maintained the most concentrated Neolithic ancestry in all of Europe, outlasted migration wave after migration wave that reshaped everything around them, and left no written name, no recoverable language, no mythology we can identify. Only their bones, only their DNA, and one man, face down in the ice, with a flint arrowhead lodged between his ribs. There is a fisherman in Cagliari, Sardinia. I don't know his name, he doesn't know mine, and he almost certainly has never heard of Otzi. But in his Y chromosome, the genetic marker passed from father to son, unchanged, across generations, he carries a haplogroup called G2A-L91. His father carried it, his grandfather. Back through the steppe migrations that reshaped mainland Europe, back through the Roman period, back past the point where written history starts, That specific paternal signature survived. Because Sardinia, like the Alps, had a wall, and its wall was water. Dr. Valentina Koya, working at the European Academy of Bolzano, EURAC, confirmed something that rewrites how we understand Sardinian genetic distinctiveness. Ötzi's paternal Y chromosome lineage, G2A in the subgroup G2AL91, persists in modern European populations concentrated most heavily in Sardinia and Corsica. These island populations largely avoided the mainland replacement event. Sardinian men today carry G2A at some of the highest frequencies in Europe. The island is not a genetic anomaly. It is a genetic archive. This isn't just ancient history. This is in your DNA right now. If your paternal line traces back to Sardinia or Corsica, there is a calculable, non-trivial probability that you carry the same paternal haplogroup as the man murdered on that Alpine pass 5,300 years ago. Not metaphorically, genomically. Now hold that thought, because what Koya's team found about the maternal line is the part that stops you cold. Ötzi's maternal haplogroup, the signature passed exclusively through the female line from mother to child, is called K1F. Koya's team compared it against 1,077 modern individuals from the K haplogroup. They searched across the Alps, across Europe, across a worldwide data set. They found nothing. Not one person carrying K1F. With 95% statistical certainty, the frequency of K1F in any living population today is below 0.3%. Ötzi's mother's genetic lineage is biologically extinct. His father's line walks the streets of Cagliari. His mother's line ended. When? We don't know exactly. Why? We don't know that either. The evidence suggests K1F originated locally in the Alps. It wasn't an import from Anatolia. It wasn't a steppe signature. It was a lineage born in those mountains. And at some point, in some generation, the last woman carrying it had no daughters who survived to carry it further. Actually, hold on, because before I go on, I need to ask you something. In our last video, we tracked how an isolated population preserved a genetic signal that the mainland had completely erased. The same isolation mechanism is running here, but the outcomes were opposite for Otzi's parents. One line survived, one didn't. What previous video on this channel changed how you think about your own ancestry? Drop it below. I read them all. And I mean that, because what you're about to hear next is going to change it again. The asymmetry of that survival carries a weight that data alone can't carry. A father's line in an island fisherman who doesn't know Otzi's name. A mother's line, searched for in 1,000 samples across an entire continent, that simply isn't there. The last known carrier of K1F died over 5,000 years ago. We gave him a nickname taken from the valley where he was found. We built a sculpture of his face. We got the face wrong. The Kenes reconstruction is still in Bolzano. It was built in 2011. The artists worked from research available at the time. The genetic data hadn't even been published yet when they started sculpting. They gave him pale skin, light eyes, a full head of dark hair, a face that looks Central European in the way that feels specific and real. More than 1 million visitors have stood in front of it. The 2023 genome says that face is wrong. Not slightly wrong, wrong. Wang, Krause, and their team found strong genetic variants associated with darker skin pigmentation in Ötzi's corrected genome. This part is worth understanding clearly. The genes that produce lighter European skin tones didn't become widespread until roughly 4,000 to 3,000 years ago, when populations shifting to grain-heavy agricultural diets started needing to synthesize more vitamin D from sunlight. 5,300 years ago, Ötzi's genome says he was substantially darker skinned than the figure standing in that museum case, probably darker skinned than most of the visitors looking at him. The museum's response? Elizabeth Valaza, director of the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology, addressed it directly in 2023. She said the reconstruction was always an attempt at interpretation, a suggestion of how we imagined the Iceman during his lifetime. She said its main purpose was to show that Otzi was a modern human. And she confirmed there are currently no plans to revise it. I don't say that to criticize the museum. I say it because the gap between what the science now says and what the public display shows is not a failure of honesty, it's a failure of infrastructure. A new sculpture costs money, time, consensus building, institutional will. The correction exists in a journal. The wrong face exists in fiberglass, in a climate-controlled room, being seen by 1,000 people a day. The infrastructure of the wrong answer is more expensive to fix than the answer itself. Everything I just told you about the face, hold on to it, because it's about to mean something completely different. Because the reconstruction doesn't just have the wrong skin tone. According to the corrected genome, Ötzi carried a clear genetic predisposition for male pattern baldness. The researchers noted it may actually explain why almost no hair was found on the mummy. The man in the glass case in Bolzano is wearing a full head of hair that was probably already gone 5,000 years ago. The wrong skin, the wrong eyes, the wrong hair. 1 million visitors a year. In 2013, at the Rewrote Institute for Mummy Studies in Bolzano, microbiologist Frank Meixner faced a problem. He wanted to look for bacteria in Otzi's stomach. Standard approach would be to examine the stomach lining, the mucosa, the inner tissue. But Otzi's stomach mucosa was gone, destroyed by 5,000 years of preservation and the various handling processes the mummy had been through. So Meixner tried something different. He extracted the entire DNA content of the stomach's preserved contents, the food itself. And living in the residue of a meal eaten 5,300 years ago, in a stomach that had been frozen in a glacier since before the Egyptian pyramids existed, he found Helicobacter pylori. You know this bacterium. It lives in the stomachs of approximately half of all living human beings right now. It causes ulcers. It causes gastric cancer in a small percentage of those it infects. In most people, it simply lives there, quietly, for a lifetime. And in Ötzi's stomach contents, published in the journal Science in January 2016, Meixner's team reconstructed its complete 5,300-year-old genome. What they found next changed everything they thought they knew about this pathogen's spread. The strain was of Asian origin, consistent with the Neolithic farming population expansion that carried it westward out of Anatolia thousands of years before Ötzi was born. And his immune system had already begun reacting to it. Inflammatory proteins were detected in the stomach contents. He was living with an active infection on the day he died. He probably had chronic stomach pain. That morning, his last morning, he ate well anyway. Meixner's team, in a 2018 Current Biology paper analyzing 167 proteins in the stomach contents, identified the last meal precisely: dried ibex meat, red deer muscle tissue, einkorn wheat, and fat. Roughly half the stomach contents by volume were animal fat residues, predominantly from ibex. A high-altitude survival diet, calorie-dense, prepared deliberately. He knew what he was doing. He had done this before. He ate, he walked. He was somewhere above 3,000 meters, and then someone caught him on a mountain pass with his back turned. But wait, we have his genome now. We have his last meal. We have his bacterial profile. We know his ancestry. We know his hair, his skin, his eyes. The portrait feels complete. That feeling is wrong. What they found next changed everything they thought they knew about his paternal lineage. The 2025 Nature Communications study, analyzing 22 alpine individuals, went looking for Otzi's specific Y chromosome haplogroup, not the broader G2A family that survives in Sardinia, his branch. The precise sub-branch labeled G2A Z6208. They checked ancient genomes. They checked modern databases. They checked the 10,000-plus individuals in the ancient Archaeogenetics reference database. Not one match, anywhere. The Sardinian fisherman carries G2A, the family name, but Otzi's specific branch of that family has no living members we've found. No ancient members either. His paternal line, it turns out, is also extinct. We just didn't know that until 2025. Both lines, gone. Altitude 3,210 meters, somewhere in the Ötztal Alps, around 3,300 BCE. His stomach is full. The ibex fat, the red deer, the einkorn wheat. 90 minutes of digestion documented in undigested residue. His intestinal contents show 2 prior meals from the day before. He has been moving between elevations. He is not lost. He knows this terrain. The arrow enters from behind, downward angle. It passes through his back, lodges between his ribcage and his left shoulder blade, and severs the subclavian artery. The left subclavian artery. He has minutes, probably less. A 2025 study in the International Journal of Legal Medicine reanalyzed Ötzi's 2013 CT scans using three-dimensional forensic modeling, the same techniques used in contemporary homicide reconstructions. What they found that nobody had seen before: a previously undetected hematoma of approximately 110 milliliters in volume near the wound site. That finding changes the timeline. Death from blood loss alone may not have been instantaneous. He may have lived for some period after the arrow struck, hours potentially. The forensic animation also confirmed the arrow's trajectory: straight path, clean angle, consistent with a single shot from a single archer standing behind him and above him. The arrowhead is still in his body. The shaft was removed, probably by the person who shot him, probably while Ötzi was still dying, before rigor mortis made the body too rigid to manipulate. Someone stood over him. Someone worked quickly and deliberately. We have their work. We don't have their name. There are three things this forensic evidence shows us. The first is how he died. The second is that the killing was planned. The third, and this is the one that changes how you read everything else, is what his right hand tells us. Between Ötzi's thumb and index finger, there is a deep cut. Forensic analysis showed it was several days old at the time of his death, already healing. That wound pattern is consistent with a defensive grip, a hand closing around a blade coming toward you. He had been in a fight days before he died. He survived it. Then, on a mountain pass, with a full stomach and an infected gut and a healing hand, someone came at him from behind while he wasn't looking. The Cambridge World History of Violence cited Otzi in 2020 as evidence of prehistoric warfare. But one arrow, one planned approach, one managed scene. This is closer to assassination than warfare. One person, known to him, with a reason. We will never know the reason. And then, one more question the genome is only beginning to ask. Epigenetic research is now examining whether catastrophic population-level violence leaves heritable biological markers in survivors' descendants. Stress signatures encoded not in the genetic sequence itself, but in how it's expressed. Ötzi's people were largely replaced within 3 centuries of his death. What they passed forward before the replacement, we are only starting to ask. When Ötzi fell, he was carrying a copper axe, yew wood handle, birch tar adhesive, original leather binding, the oldest complete copper axe ever found, with all its components intact. For decades, archaeologists assumed the copper came from the Alps. Reasonable assumption. There are ore deposits nearby. The man died in those mountains. Local material, local tools. In 2017, Professor Gilberto Artioli's research group at the University of Padua published a paper in PLOS One that ended that assumption. Artioli's team took a tiny sample from the blade and ran lead isotope analysis, comparing the ratios of different lead isotopes in the copper against a database of ore deposits from across Europe and the Mediterranean. Lead isotope ratios are a chemical fingerprint. They don't change when metal is smelted or worked. Whatever ore the copper came from, the signature stays. And the signature in Ötzi's axe didn't match the Alps. It didn't match the Balkans. It matched southern Tuscany, 500 kilometers south of where he died. And yet, the data said the exact opposite of what every prior assumption about him suggested. Genetically sealed from the world north of his mountains, economically connected to a civilization 500 kilometers south. Those two facts do not obviously belong to the same man, but they do. The implications went further. Typological comparisons with axe blades from central Italy suggest Ötzi may not have obtained raw copper and worked it himself. He may have traded for a finished blade, an import already crafted, carried north through intermediaries whose names and routes we can't recover. The axe that marked him as someone with status, someone with access, the object that communicated his position to every stranger he passed, it was made by someone he never met, in a place he almost certainly never went. The copper trade that moved this blade 500 kilometers required organization, repeated contact, recognized exchange value. Defenders, probably, for that distance. Profit margins that made the journey worth the risk. We can see none of that. No records, no names, no language, no governance structure. Just the axe and the isotope ratio, and a line 500 kilometers long drawn from southern Tuscany to a glacier in the Italian Alps. The social infrastructure that ran a Copper Age continental economy while remaining invisible to its neighbors. It was never written. It was never biological. It's gone. Haplogroup K1F, mitochondrial lineage, traced to a specific population in the Eastern Alps. Searched in 1,077 modern individuals, not found. Confirmed extinct with 95% statistical certainty. Frequency in any living population below 0.3%. The last known carrier was found in a glacier in 1991. Before that, the last known carrier died in a glacier in approximately 3,300 BCE. Valentina Koya's team at Urac established this. Her search was not small. 1,077 samples. 42 of them came from people whose mothers and grandmothers were confirmed to be from the Alpine region. She was looking specifically. The search was thorough. The answer came back the same way every time. Nothing. The lineage did not migrate out of the Alps and survive elsewhere. It did not hybridize into broader populations in a way that left its signature diluted but detectable. According to the evidence, it originated locally, in those mountains, in a population that never grew large, that never spread far, that held on for as long as the mountains held, and then stopped. If you are a man with Sardinian ancestry, there is still a calculable probability you carry G2A, the broader paternal family that connects to Ötzi's father's line. But the 2025 study confirmed that Ötzi's specific paternal subbranch, G2A-Z6208, is absent from every ancient and modern individual tested to date. The Sardinian fisherman carries the family name. Ötzi's specific branch has no members. His mother's line is gone. His father's specific line is gone. The 2012 genome that made him famous contains someone else's cells. The reconstruction that stands for him in Bolzano shows someone else's face, wrong skin, wrong eyes, wrong hair. If you've been building this research for this channel and it moves you, subscribe, because this work isn't finished. And neither is what the genome still has left to tell us. But here is what is real. The copper axe with the birch tar handle is real. The ibex fat, still measurable, still identifiable by species in a stomach last filled 5,300 years ago, that's real. The flint arrowhead, lodged between a man's ribs for over 5 millennia, is real. The 110 milliliter hematoma that told us he didn't die instantly, that's real. The healing cut between his thumb and finger, the fight he survived 3 days before the fight he didn't, real. All of it recoverable. All of it evidence of a specific life, lived specifically, ended specifically. A woman lived in the Alps over 5,000 years ago. She had a son. Her son ate well on the last morning of his life. Her son's genome was misread by the best scientists in the world for 10 years. Her son's face is still wrong in a museum in northern Italy. And her lineage, K1F, the one that began in those mountains, that never left them, that outlasted wave after wave of everything that came to change Europe, ended. Not in catastrophe, not in war that we can document. In absence. She has no descendants. She has no name. She has one afternoon in a glacier and a laboratory in Leipzig that got it right on the second try.